Thanks so much, Ray. And thanks, everyone, for joining today for tips and advice on how you can apply growth hacking to your business. Before we start off, Ray, do you want to launch the first poll? So we have a couple polling questions along the way just for me to kind of get a feel of who's on the webinar and sort of how you work in your business day to day, what your role is, what's your business status, I guess I would say. And one of the questions that I ask people frequently when I start working on a growth hacking strategy is, how much do you work on the business or on your career versus in the business? And those are two fundamentally different approaches to work. It's important as part of your business strategy to give yourself space to actually work on the business, to work on the strategy versus working in it. And I know that's a real challenge. It's probably been a challenge for me my entire career, but I really try to get as much balance in there as possible and allow myself space to work on the strategy. So if you could answer that question, I think we'll have the results here in just a second. On. Oh, wow, that's a good split. A lot of you are working on the business, which is awesome. Usually it's much lower, so you guys are already ahead of the curve. So I thought I would start off the presentation. And oh, there we go. I think I'm getting the presentation back here. Here we go. So I thought I would start off the presentation by just kind of explaining what growth hacking is, because I think it's a relatively new term in the industry, but it's a really long-held practice among some of the best internet marketers and product managers in Silicon Valley. I think we've noticed the same trend in research that, mass media is sort of fading away. There's a lot of, customization and niching on the web, and that doesn't just affect our ability to do research as marketers, but it also really impacts marketing as we've known it for, the past 100 years. And more than ever, people are just awash with mounds of data, and marketing fatigue is at an all-time high. And that doesn't just go for consumers. It goes for people, within our own industry. It goes for B2B marketing. And that makes it more challenging for people to really pay attention to your messaging regardless of how good it is. So distribution and getting out marketing communication that's really effective is now the #1 problem that faces pretty much every product and every startup. And I think, one of the really essential characteristics of growth hacking is creativity. And I'm going to share with you some sort of creative strategies that you can start thinking about utilizing in your own business. So oops, it's going back they're really fast. So this is one of my favorite images. Phase 1, collect underpants. Phase 2, something magical happens, and then Phase 3, all of a sudden you have this amazingly profitable business. And I think unfortunately a lot of people go into their businesses with this approach, and this sort of I was talking to a gentleman earlier this week, and he said, "Gosh, we're like hamsters on a wheel. We're just moving so fast. We're just trying to keep our heads above water." And I can certainly identify with that. I've been at that place in my own businesses. I think that the end goal of every growth hacking strategy is really to build a self-perpetuating marketing machine that reaches, millions by itself. But, growth hacking in itself is a process. It's not a secret book of ideas. It's not a magical, collect underpants, make a lot of money strategy. Growth strategies can't be easily copied and pasted from product to product. It's never instantaneous. It's never overnight. It's a mindset in terms of how you solve problems. So keep that in mind as we're going through the presentation today. I also think that there's a sort of a misnomer that growth hacking or lean startup principles are really just for entrepreneurs. And yes, they do apply to entrepreneurs. This is one of my favorite graphs about startups, and this is what happens to most startups is that they have this amazing idea. It's innovative. They've got a lot of early adopters. They've got a lot of cash, and then sometime between the adoption rate, which is what needs to happen by the early majority, the late majority, the laggards, and the cash flow is that they run out of cash and they experience this vault called the valley of death, which is where your business essentially dies unless you pivot and change something or take on more cash. So this is kind of a common unfortunate theme when you're starting a business, that many times you run out of money before your entire idea gets realized. And the key to staying alive is either pivot or to persevere in some meaningful way. But this can also apply to what I like to call entrepreneurs, and I'm sure there's many of you on this call today. Entrepreneurs are people that are essentially running startups or product development within a company. So you don't have to be a business owner or someone that is in a startup in Silicon Valley. Startups also happen within big companies. I was just at an event earlier this week where I met a woman from HP, and she runs a new product division internally inside HP, and she was talking about lean startup principles and growth hacking and a lot of the principles that they're using, that are much like a startup but within a large company. And similarly, smaller firms working on a product release, kind of run into these similar problems where, again, you've got the innovators, the early adopters, where there might be this, chasm, and you might kind of run out of steam or think, hey, I don't actually have a viable product. I know we went through that at Decipher, gosh, it must have been 4 or 5 years ago, where we went really hot and heavy into the community space, so trying to build online communities. And we just weren't getting any traction in it. And eventually we decided to pivot and really focus on our software development and on our data collection platform. And lo and behold, 3 years later, communities are one of the biggest sellers in market research today. And certainly I think if we had stayed focused on communities, we probably would have had an amazing product and amazing business vertical. But we really, we went to that, we had this critical point where we had to make a decision, and certainly I think we made the right one for where we were at that time in our business. But just something to think about, when you're thinking through this presentation, that this isn't just designed for startups or entrepreneurs. It's really designed for anybody working in a business that, is developing new products and services. So as I mentioned, growth hacking isn't just for startups. It's also not haphazard. It's very planned. There's a very clear strategy behind it and a very clear testing methodology behind it. It's also not siloed. It's not just for product development. It's not just for marketing. It literally touches every business unit within your company. But what it is lightweight, and by lightweight I mean it's easy to implement and it's generally low cost. And I'm going to show you some examples today of different marketing collateral that I've used throughout my career. But certainly, it doesn't have to be print collateral. I'm showing you print examples because that's the easiest to show. Ideally, most of the materials you're working with are really easy to implement, generally low cost, can be developed in-house. They're also iterative, which means they may change a lot along the way. And then creativity, collaboration is key. And then the lean startup principles, and we're going to talk about lean startup in that book in a bit. We'll do another poll about who's read that book. But lean startup principles are really about this make, test, learn cycle, which I'm going to talk more about. And something also to remember is that, traditional marketing channels often mean high cost per acquisition and sort of low lifetime value due to high saturation. So in an age of social users, the right growth strategy with the right product market fit will lead to that massive scale through viral loops. And I'm going to show you some examples of that looping strategy. So as I mentioned, the point of growth hacking is that it really the fundamental principle behind growth hacking. So, Ray, can you launch the next poll before we get into engine of growth? I'm hoping Ray is still there. There we go. So one of the fundamentals of growth hacking is really designing what your business engine of growth is. And if you're not sure, you can just select not sure. But there's 3 key engines of growth, and I'm going to talk about these in a few minutes. The first is sticky, the second is viral, and the third is paid. And again, if you're not sure, that's okay. I'm going to go into an explanation of what they are, and then you can retest yourself personally later. So Ray, do we have results? All right, 24% sticky, 9% viral, 9% paid, 58% not sure. All right, well, I'm going to talk about engines of growth. So all of you 58% who aren't sure, you're going to be sure after after this next section. So there's a number of different ways that businesses grow. The first, obviously, is through word of mouth. People tell each other about products. I know, when I buy a new product and I'm really excited about it, I tell all my family and friends about it. The second is as a side effect of product usage, so if people have a good experience. For instance, when somebody sends something to somebody and they experience something good about the product, or for instance, I think an example that's in the Lean Startup is when a customer sends money to a friend using PayPal, the friend's automatically exposed to PayPal. So that's an example of side effects. Through funded advertising, obviously, I'm sure many of us have run advertising campaigns. I know I have. I'm paid a lot to do it. And then obviously through repeat purchase or use. So some products are just designed to be purchased repeatedly. So it could be everything from groceries to light bulbs. That's an example of through repeat purchase or use. But there's three main engines of growth. So sticky, if you answered sticky to the poll, that's when the rate of new customer acquisition exceeds customer attrition. So you're not losing customers, but you're also bringing customers in through the front door. And having a really sticky model is one of the strongest engines of growth because it means you're not only retaining clients, but you're bringing new clients in. The second is viral, and that really means that customers become brand evangelists, and they really do your marketing for you. So they're going out and they're talking about your brand and really driving traffic or customers to your site. And then the third, which is probably the one that we're most familiar with, is paid. And that's not just advertising. I think a lot of times when people think about paid engines of growth, they think about putting a print ad out or doing a direct mail campaign. But it's not just advertising. It also means that you're employing an outbound sales force. I know between sticky, viral, paid, a lot of us kind of are using hybrid engines of growth, which means we're using more than one. One thing to remember, too, is that your engine of growth may change over time. So, for instance, I've certainly worked in businesses and in startups where we start out with a viral model where we're really just trying to get people on the site and familiar with what we're doing. And then eventually we move into more of a sticky model, which is we're bringing in new customers, but now we have a customer base that we're trying to retain and keep from going away. And then, later on, when the company is more mature, then we've migrated to more of a paid model where we can actually afford to hire a business development team, which I know many of us can't. I've worked in businesses for very long periods of time with no sales team where it was just me. So it's often that we don't move into that paid engine of growth until later in the company life cycle. But again, those are the three engines, and you might cycle through those. And then the goal is to obviously attain, and that's what your value proposition is. That's building something people want. So it's not just about marketing. It's about building something that people actually want to buy. It's also about sustaining, and by that I mean positioning your product or service correctly and creating value. And I think a lot of people forget about the value creation piece of it, which is what actually attracts clients to staying. And then gaining is really important. Obviously, scaling your customer base, figuring out hey, well, I've got these 20 customers. How do I scale from there? How do I bring new clients in, and how do I create new value propositions that are going to drive future growth? Oops, went too far. So, and then next is really about defining your strategy. And there's 4 key principles that I like to think of when I'm looking at strategy development. The first is really just a total commitment to vision. And when I say a total commitment to vision, I don't mean blindly going into product development and being so focused on the product that you come up with that you lose sight of the fact that maybe no one is interested in it, which has certainly happened to me throughout my career. What I mean by a total commitment to vision is that you have a vision of building a business and having it be a success, and that the product that you originally designed might iterate and become something else over time, but ultimately what your goal is to drive a product or service of value to clients. So when I say total commitment to vision, what I mean is a total commitment without ego. And that can be really challenging a lot of the time. I know I've had what I felt were a couple of really amazing product ideas, And the truth of the matter is that nobody was interested in buying them. So I had to pivot and change and create something new of value that people really valued and really wanted to buy. The second is, do you have money or do you have time? I know in a workshop that I just conducted in Amsterdam a few weeks ago, a lot of the answers that I got back were, well, I have no money and I have no time. And I think that that's a common refrain, that I hear from business owners. I know it's challenging. We don't have money and we're really strapped for resources. But the key to growth is that you really have to find one of the two. The best case scenario is that you have lots of money and lots of time. I think that rarely happens. But you need to create space and time to work on your business strategy if you don't have the money to support hiring someone to work on it, or you don't have money to pay for staff to kind of free your time up. Thirdly is introvert or extrovert, and this is a really important differentiator because this can actually define a lot of your marketing strategy, your go-to market strategy. I think a lot of people would be surprised to hear that I'm actually really introverted. Introverts typically recharge and sort of find their balance when they're alone. I really love being alone. I'm not naturally extroverted. I think over the course of my career I've probably become more of an ambivert, so I'm a little bit of both. But I think realizing what your comfort level is, not everyone is going to go out in the industry and become their own brand evangelist. Some people aren't comfortable with public speaking. That's okay. There's lots of different ways that you can market your business that don't involve getting up in front of people or, being a prolific writer. So thinking about that and kind of determining what you are is really important. And then having really clear KPIs. And for those of you who aren't familiar with KPIs, they're key performance indicators. They really are the metrics for what sort of defines whether your business are a success or failure. And I really encourage people to think very, very carefully about, what real key performance indicators are. There's a real, I think, reluctance to put KPIs in place that will actually measure poor performance. A lot of us are really attracted to vanity metrics, myself included. Every time I create a new KPI, I really have to sit and think, like, is this actually going to deliver actionable data? So, for instance, an example of a KPI might be website hits. So, everybody loves to see website hits going up. How many people are hitting your landing page? And we all like to see that, beautiful hockey stick, going up and website hits growing. But the truth of the matter is that it doesn't really matter how many people are visiting your website if it doesn't result in some sort of sales conversion. So are people going to your info box? Are they making a request for more information? And then are you actually closing that lead? So that's an example of a vanity metric versus a KPI. So a vanity metric might be a website hit, but then conversion to lead or to info box would be less of a vanity metric around that. And then there's this whole build, measure, learn cycle, which if you've read the Lean Startup or if you're familiar with Lean Startup principles, is a really important part of growth hacking, and it applies not just to product development but also to marketing. It can be communication campaigns. It can be just the idea or concept of a new product. To build something, and Eric Ries in the Lean Startup talks a lot about a minimum viable product, and that is just the bare minimum that you need to develop to get people really interested and to get some feedback on what you're actually doing. And again, that can also apply to a marketing campaign. You can test different marketing messaging, do some A/B testing where you have two different messages that you're sending out, to basically identical groups of people, and then seeing which message resonates. Again, the goal is to spend as little time and as little money creating messaging and creating products before you find out, if people are really interested in them and if that product or service really resonates. So I'm going to take you through actually a case study of that sort of build, measure, learn cycle. I'm going to take you through a couple iterations of it so you can kind of get a feel for how that works. So although I'm going to focus on marketing in this case study, you'll be able to see that you can use these principles to test business hypotheses other than marketing. So just try to keep an open mind when I'm walking you through. I know once I start talking about marketing collateral, the natural inclination is to just start thinking about marketing, but you can use it for product development and pretty much any business hypothesis that you want to test. So I'm going to use Decipher as a case study because many of you are familiar with that brand. It's obviously a brand I'm very familiar with because up until a couple months ago, I was still with the company. We sold back in November of 2014 to Focus Vision. So it's Focus Vision now. But I want to talk about Decipher because it's an example of how growth hacking works within an existing business. So Decipher had been in business about 10 years when I joined the firm. I joined in 2007, so they've been in business about 7 years. And we had a lot of really interesting challenges, which is what made joining Decipher such an interesting project for me. The first is that we had some very utilitarian branding, and there's two types of branding. There's utilitarian, which is very, very much focused on products and tools. It talks about exactly what it is that you do. And there's aspirational branding, which is more to talk about the intrinsic benefits of what you're getting from working or buying that brand. And so when I joined Decipher, there was very utilitarian branding. It was very product-based versus solutions-based, and we talked a lot about what our tools were and what they actually did. We were also in a really commoditized and expensive sort of market. So at the time I joined the firm, we were a services business only. We didn't do any, we didn't license our software platform at all at that point. So now we have our software platform, Beacon, that is licensed. But at that point, it was services only. We had this amazing software platform, but it was only used internally. And we were in this really highly commoditized space where we were really just competing on price. And when you're just competing on price, that's a very, very dangerous space, to live in as a business because you're not really competing on intrinsic value or on special functionality or things that you do that are different or better. It was really just about the price. And so you're either the lowest price, or you're not in the game. And we, many times, were not the lowest price. We had a very different strategy. We kept all of our business onshore. We didn't offshore any of our programming services, and that's true, to this day, or at least up until a couple months ago. And so we had a very, unique proposition, but again, very commoditized and very price sensitive. We were also late to market when we did launch our software product. So one of our, our key engines of growth was to really look at getting our software into the marketplace. But we were late to market. There were already some big players there that created some pretty high barriers to entry. Confirmit is one of the largest, most well-known platforms. Dimensions, Qualtrics had launched already, and then just recently got $170 million in funding. So some pretty high barriers to entry and some pretty good platforms that were already out there. And then we had also made some pain point assumptions. We had thought, hey, if we come up with a better product that's easier to use, that has an amazing reporting tool, and is less expensive, that people will just switch. And the truth of the matter is that we underestimated the pain of switching. It's very, very tough to get people to switch a survey software platform when it's so deeply ingrained in the business. And so there has to be, almost a business crisis in order for them to make that switch. So there were some real assumptions, as you can see from this list, that we made about, sort of how to position our business and how easy it would be to enter those marketplaces. And this is sort of the product or branding history that I just wanted to walk you quickly through. So in 2000, my two business partners, Jamin and Jamie, created Decipher. It was a full-service research firm, and they created it right in the height of the dot-com boom in Silicon Valley, and most of their clients were in the tech industry. And then a couple years later, in 2002, the dot-com crash happened, and almost overnight, about 80% of their clients went away. And so rather than just fold the business, they did what all good entrepreneurs do, and they pivoted and persevered. They downsized the brand to focus on market research services, and you can kind of see that changing in the logo. So they went from Decipher with a more aspirational tagline, know your customer, know yourself, down to a more utilitarian brand strategy, which is just survey programming and reporting. When I joined the firm in 2007, we were at this really critical juncture. We were trying to figure out, how are we going to scale this business and ultimately sell it at someday for a lot of money. And one of the #1 ways to do that is to move more out of a services-based business and really start licensing that technology platform that we had. So we embarked on two different strategies. One was a product development strategy to really build out the front end of that system. But the second was also to really work on our brand awareness and create a space for ourselves in the marketplace so that people knew who they were and they had a real clear understanding of the products and services that we offered and ultimately the software that we were going to launch. So we did just a brand awareness study back in 2007. Brand awareness in the marketplace was about 10%. And we went through just a first, sort of comprehensive wave of rebranding, and that was really just around kind of just updating our look and feel. And you can see we moved from that older Decipher logo to sort of just an updated more 2007 Decipher logo that was again focused on that survey programming and reporting messaging. From 2008 to 2010, we were really focused on that software platform development, and so there was a lot of iteration and discussion and testing about what functionality was valuable to clients, what was sort of resonating in terms of what people wanted and expected from our brand. And from 2011 to 2012, we did two different waves of research. We did some product and branding research. We tested our brand awareness again, which at that point was 30%. And then we did a pivot and we decided to focus on a more of an aspirational ad campaign. And that's where you see again the logo changes, our tagline changes, and now we're talking not just about survey program and reporting, which are functional tasks, but about using our software and services to really illuminate opportunity, to really look deeper into our clients' businesses and help them understand what some basic opportunities are that they might be missing out on. In 2013, we did some additional brand research and marketing iteration. And then in 2014, we tested our brand awareness again. It was at nearly 70%. And that was right around the time that we sold to Focus Vision, which is in November of 2014. So I'm going to walk you through sort of how that sort of iterated from a marketing campaign standpoint, just so you guys can kind of see. And what I'm going to do is use print collateral because it's been in the public domain. It's it's available on has been available digitally online, but I want to kind of iterate that much of our marketing practice was digital. The reason we use digital really heavily was that it's low cost, it's easy to iterate, you can make changes quickly, and so certainly just because you see some print and online examples here doesn't mean that was what we primarily used, because we didn't. We did a ton of digital and email marketing, which is really, really low cost to implement. So this was sort of the first iteration. You can see the original website up in the upper left-hand corner. And then we had, some print campaigns that we ran. The website on the left eventually iterated to the website on the right. And then we had some print collateral that we used and a few really basic ads that we ran in print publications. And then, and this is just a dummy reporting page, but, we looked at a lot of metrics. We looked at, how's our website performing? We looked at, are the advertising driving more hits? Is it driving more sales conversions? What can we do differently? What message is resonating and what's not? And after we go through a measurement cycle, that's the time to sit back and learn, and that's where the next wave of branding research came in, which is when we moved initially from that survey programming and reporting logo and started focusing more on, what are the opportunity, how can we illuminate opportunity using our tools and services, and really focusing on insight, innovation, inspiration to ultimately drive impact. And that resulted in us using a lot of case studies for who's used the tool and the results and sort of when to use our tools and services. So that means we go back to the drawing board, which means, we went back and we iterated again on a lot of our marketing messaging. So again, repositioning ourselves as not just a services provider, but as a solutions provider, and sort of iterating a lot of that marketing messaging. And again, going back through that measurement cycle. Same reporting slides, nothing's different here, it's just a screenshot. But looking at what our conversion rates are, where our traffic sources are coming from, how our social media is performing. And then again, going back to figure out, have we moved the needle some? What have we learned? And what we learned after that next wave of advertising campaigns is that people really wanted and expected more from us as a brand. And it created a real big opportunity for us. We were sort of seen as an enabler, a collaborator, a provider, an expert. And you might think, hey, those are all, great things to be known for. But we really wanted to be known as an innovator, a trendsetter, an educator, a pioneer, a leader. And that means that we have to fundamentally shift the brand toward that type of messaging. We need to become a company that challenges our clients to think differently. We need to show our clients how we can help them achieve their goals. We have to be known as a company that has the courage to try new things. And we also need to be a company that can be in charge and really take responsibility. And those were all key things that we decided we could really address in a lot of our brand messaging. So guess what? We went back and we iterated again. We really started focusing more on solutions-based services. The one on the left is the old landing page for our website, which is more about collaborating with clients, more about focusing on the benefits that they get from our platform, and not just focused on saving money, but also on saving time and reducing research redundancy. These were all really powerful messages that really resonated with our client base. And again, we went back and measured. We looked at what was working, what wasn't working. We iterated a lot of the messaging. So we had a couple different waves of messaging. We tweaked, our client updates. So we iterated again and again and again. And what that ultimately resulted in was moving from a very functional or vendor-based role, which was what we were in 2008 when we originally measured. And by functional, I mean we were really seen as a facilitator, a provider, a supplier, a vendor, and a friend. And, gosh, we want to be friends. But we want to be more than just a vendor. To 2014, when we tested again, we were really seen as more of an emotional partner. We were perceived as an innovator, a trendsetter, an educator, a pioneer, a leader. And that's what fundamentally moved that brand forward. And there were a lot of different strategies that we used, and I'm going to go into these in just a few minutes, but I know probably that the one thing people are most interested in are, hey, what were the results from that campaign? And obviously, I've just shown you a small part of the puzzle. As I mentioned, product development and having a solid product and having an engineering team that, was really, pumping out some amazing software was a very, very critical component of our success. And obviously, I can't disclose what we sold Focus Vision for, but I can tell you that it had a real impact on our revenue. We had double-digit revenue growth annually since 2007, and that's even through the height of the economic downturn. We had over a 60% increase in brand awareness. Our unique website visits were up 70% year over year since 2012. Our social media reach just this last year was up 47% year over year. Our email open rates are 10% higher than industry average. And we had a reduced cost per client acquisition. The first 5 years that I was at Decipher, I was really the only person selling along with my 2 business partners. So we didn't have a sales team. We didn't have much of a marketing budget. I think, annually we spent less than 3% of our revenue on marketing. So, much of what we did involved, really hitting the streets and using some guerrilla marketing strategies and, making sure that we were bringing in clients in the cheapest way that we could. And at the end of the day, whatever we do from a marketing perspective is all about one thing, and that is, did it drive sales? That's all we care about. Did it drive sales? And one thing to remember when you're looking at metrics and marketing KPIs is that you can't measure everything that goes into building a brand. There's intrinsic things that happen with brand building that aren't measurable, but you can measure a lot. You can measure a lot when it comes to marketing, and so I would really encourage you, as you sort of start looking at your own marketing and product development practices, that you really make sure that you have those clear KPIs in place. So strategies. One of the key development strategies that we used was to create a development feedback loop, which is to make sure that we had some key clients that were really part of that development process, that beta tested our software, and that we could really go to and turn to when we were testing out new functionality, sort of let us know what resonated. And we spent a lot of time, not just doing customer sat work, but also talking to clients to find out what sort of functionality was missing from their current platform and what we could kind of do to move and change that needle. We also came up with some really creative approaches to pain points. So one of the pain points that I mentioned earlier was that we had a real hard time getting people to switch platforms, which was really surprising to us. It was, a hypothesis that we had that obviously we didn't really fully test before we went to market, but once we got on the market, we realized that particularly for larger firms, it was really hard to get people to switch. And so we came up with some creative approaches. One of the approaches we came up with was the Beacon Transition Plan. And the transition plan we marketed to allow people to use our platform for up to a year while they were still using their existing platforms. They could use this for free as long as they licensed us at the end of that term. So we signed the licensing agreement first. They would have a year to migrate and use the platform absolutely free. They could field as many survey completes on it as they wanted to. But that sort of took care of a lot of the pain points of moving, which is, oh my gosh, I have to train an entire new programming team, or I have to integrate this in my business in some fundamental way. It's very, very hard for people to do that without licensing two platforms, which is extremely expensive. So Beacon Transition Plan was one of the key things that really helped move the platform open, and it was actually so controversial that a lot of the industry publications wouldn't actually run ads for us about it because they thought it was too inflammatory. So usually when you're pissing off your competitors, that's a good sign you're doing something right. The other thing that we did is we used clients as advocates. So we really used clients to help evangelize our brand. We used lots of case studies, lots of client quotes in our materials. We really asked clients to advocate for us, and that was really powerful and a very inexpensive way of getting our messaging out. As I just showed you, we used continuous measurement and iteration. So we were constantly measuring and iterating all our messaging as well as our product development. We used thought leadership and public relations very, very heavily. We have a great PR firm that's based in my hometown of Bend, Oregon, right here, Campbell Consulting. That was an amazing partner for us. Obviously I was out in the industry doing a lot of thought leadership, but we also did, a lot of social media thought leadership and writing and blogging and using public relations really to our benefit. Very inexpensive way of getting traction in the industry. And then there's lots of marketing automation tools that we use, and I'll share a couple of those with you in a minute. There was also a really interesting article, actually, that just came out yesterday in Research Live called Good Content Strategy Requires Risk-Taking. And before I go any further, I just want to talk about that for a second. And I think that's a really important component. Good content strategy requires risk-taking, which means that you're testing lots of different messaging in your content. And Sarah Benison, who's the marketing director of Barclays, had this interesting quote where she said, marketers need to learn how to fail and be nimble if content strategy is to be at the heart of marketing. And I think that's really important. You can't be afraid to fail, and that's why it's so important to really have those actionable KPIs and metrics in place so that you really have an understanding of what's working and what's not, and that you also create space for failure. If there's zero tolerance for errors or failure, it's going to be very, very tough to move that needle because you're never going to actually want to test and iterate anything. So risk-taking and failure, very important pieces of the strategy. Nobody likes to fail, but it's unfortunately a reality. So Ray, I think we are ready for the third poll. And the third poll is about whether or not you've read any of these books. And Ray actually gave me a really interesting statistics about a week ago because he sat through my growth hacking workshop in Amsterdam. And one of the things that he told me was that people in this industry do not read. And I think the average Which of the following books have you read? These are 4 of my favorites. The Lean Startup, 4 Steps to the Epiphany, Contagious, and The Influential. So Ray, do we have the results? All right, Ray is right. Nobody is reading. 73% of you said you hadn't read any of those books. Okay, maybe you're reading, but you just haven't read these 4 books. I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. So 4 of my favorite books, which really lend themselves to growth hacking and lean startup principles. Obviously, the Lean Startup, Eric Ries. If you haven't read the Lean Startup, it's literally like one of my Bibles. It's a really important part of my process, and a lot of the principles that I've talked about today are are in the Lean Startup. The predecessor to the Lean Startup is The 4 Steps to the Epiphany by Steve Blank. And that's really the book that kind of launched the Lean Startup evolution. So if you want to kind of read them in order, I would say read The 4 Steps to the Epiphany first and then the Lean Startup. Jonah Berger published a fascinating book. He's a professor at Wharton called Contagious, Why Things Catch On. If you were at all interested in the viral engine of growth, I would strongly suggest that you read Contagious. Jonah Berger's book is fascinating, and it really talks about the fundamental principles of how you get things to catch on, how you make a product or service viral. And then lastly, if you don't know Ed Keller in our industry, you haven't been paying attention, Ed Keller is one of the partners at Keller Fay Group. He and Brad Fay are really the industry leaders of word-of-mouth research, and he wrote this fascinating book a few years ago called The Influentials. And again, that really plays into these viral and sticky sort of engines of growth and how you really maximize those. So if you're going to read any books this year, I would say please read one of these 4. And then, of course, Ray's books, because Ray's an amazing author. Some resources, because I know everybody always wants to know, well, what are some automation or resources that I can use to sort of supercharge my business or start adopting some of these growth hacking strategies. So I've made 2 columns here. I've got the freebies, because I love free software, and there's a lot of good free software out there. For a CRM system, Zolo is one of the best free software systems out there. It's a free CRM system. I've always used Google Analytics very heavily. If you don't look at Google Analytics for your website and for a lot of your marketing KPIs, you're really missing out. It's free. Hootsuite to manage social media. Hootsuite has a free version that you can use. MailChimp is great for email marketing, particularly if you have pretty small lists. You can use MailChimp for free. And then even once your list size grows, I think it's maybe $50 a month. But there is a free version. There's also a fascinating study that came out last year that Harvard Business Review published called the Marketing 2020 study. You can download it online. Just search for Marketing 2020. Please, if you are involved in marketing in any capacity, read that report. It's fascinating. Also, one to add to this free list, which I just found literally 2 days ago, is a website called Open Strategy. If you go to Open Strategy, it literally has just lists and lists and lists of free software categorized by what it's for, and it's for everything from conducting research to A/B testing methods to marketing automation systems. So check that out. And then if you have money and you can afford to buy some of these systems, there are so many great ones. Salesforce is my favorite. I even license Salesforce for my little consulting business because I just love it and I use it every day, and I'm really familiar with Salesforce, and they have awesome reporting. Single user, $25 a month. Super low price point, cost to entry. Raven Tools is great for reporting dashboards and reporting. And if you really want a really robust, pretty dashboard that's very executive friendly and that people can just log into and see lots of cool reports, Scythe is a really way of getting to those. I love Sprout Social for managing social media. Sprout is amazing. So if you manage a lot of different social media accounts, or if you just want an easier way of automating your social media practice, Sprout Social is great. And then either Pardot or Dotmailer for email automation. Again, these are both paid systems. Pardot just syncs beautifully with Salesforce and with WordPress. It's super easy to use, and will make your marketing manager super happy because it's highly automated, highly integrated with a lot of these other platforms. So those are my picks for best free software. So I want to leave you with a few things. The first is, most importantly, determine your engine of growth. And again, be prepared for that engine of growth to change or iterate over time. It's really important that you're looking at your business strategy and your engine of growth on an ongoing basis. And by that I mean at least quarterly you should be looking at it. The second is to commit to your vision without ego. And for those of you like me that have a big ego and don't like to be proven wrong, this can be one of the most challenging things, to commit to your vision without ego. But understand that failure or finding out that your product idea or that your marketing campaign wasn't successful is just an opportunity for improvement. That's all. It's not a personal commentary on your own performance. It's an opportunity for change and to do something better. The third is to really adopt that build, measure, learn feedback loop. Very easy to do. I know if you've read the Lean Startup, I know the build, measure, learn feedback loop that Eric Ries talks about happens very, very quickly. In my businesses, it's happened much more slowly. Sometimes, you build, you measure, you learn, and it's a 3-month loop versus, a 3-day loop. So, but just to have that feedback loop in place is really, really important. Fourth is to iterate or pivot when required. And iteration and pivoting is really important to the long-term stability and success of your business. If you're doing something and it's clearly not working, if clients are giving you feedback that they don't like it, that is an opportunity for change. So iteration means you're changing something about the product. The pivot might mean that you're changing your entire business model. I know that kind of change is often scary for people, but it's always better to pivot than it is to die. So iterate or pivot when required. And then lastly, avoid vanity metrics. I know, gosh, I love vanity metrics. They're feel-good metrics. I love a beautiful hockey stick graph. I love seeing success. But at the end of the day, it has to be driving fundamental change and growth for the company, or isn't it an actionable metric? So keep that in mind. And then I just wanted to leave you with my favorite quote, and if you've seen me present before, you've probably seen this quote from Nolan Bushnell, but it's got one of my favorite lines in there. It says, there are few who decide to do something about an idea today, not tomorrow, not next week, but today. The true entrepreneur is a doer, not a dreamer. And that applies to you whether you're an entrepreneur in a large company or an entrepreneur struggling through your first startup. You're a doer, not a dreamer. Don't think about it. Just get off your butt and do it. So, Ray, thank you for having me, and I think we're going to open up for questions.